Well, then you'll be right
The
there.
dog people.
We've got 5.
Welcome to the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers of Washington and its monthly author showcase. I am your host, Mark Miller. Today I have the privilege to interview a distinct force in the local independent film industry, Jennifer DiMarco of Blue Forge Films. Jennifer is a published author, screenwriter, director, producer, business manager, actress, and parent. Probably next year she's going to be the discoverer of a warp drive. Jennifer DiMarco has squeezed so many accomplishments into her life, it makes the rest of us feel like slugs in comparison. I've asked her to be here on the Claw hot seat. I think she has a very unique story about overcoming adversity and yet still be a standout success. Jennifer, we've talked a lot of times on Facebook, and I'm going to let you introduce.
My special guest that I
Yes.
brought along with me today is my wife, Brianne, and the reason I really wanted her to be here, Mark, when we talked, is that for the last 6 years, Blue Forge Films, the face of Blue Forge Films has been me.
Right.
And Blue Forge Films is actually just one division under a larger creative group called Blue Forge Group, which is a federal nonprofit. And I would like Brianne to become the face of Blue Forge Films, especially for this year, because I need to step back from Blue Forge Films and focus on some of our other divisions. So I wanted to make sure that people got to hear from her today as well.
Well, good. Kind of bouncing off of that, I want to jump in right now and talk to you about your kind of unique situation when how you all got started. It shaped your development of Blue Forge Films and the movie that you've made. So go ahead and tell us exactly how did you wind up starting in movies?
Well, I would love to take all of the credit. Either of us would love to take the credit. We had a dream, a mission. But what happened was I was very, very young, when I was very, very young, so we have to like back it all the way up into the 70s. I told my mom that I wanted to be a writer when I grew up, and she was smart enough, I think, to say, well, then you better start now, because there is a teeny tiny, people weren't even talking about the 1% back then, this was a different 1%. There's a teeny tiny 1% that make a living as writers. So I took that advice to heart and had completed my first 65,000 word novel at the age of 10. By the time I was 16, I'd written 12 more. I started publishing with independent presses simply by walking my manuscripts in. And so that kind of set this foundation of already being in the entertainment industry.
I'm going to jump in to ask you a couple quick questions. So where were you walking the books into, like what cities and stuff, and what kind of genre were you dealing with when you were writing at that young age?
Those are great questions. I
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, I like that. Mark, no wonder. I was living in Seattle at the time. I grew up in Seattle. And at that point, there was no self-publishing. And I'll qualify that because I've said that once before in front of a live audience, and someone in the audience went, Walt Whitman! And I'm like, yes, I know self-publishing has been around since the beginning of time. Even Walt Whitman first self-published much of his work, actually. But nowadays, if you write a book, you can go online and select any number of places that will publish it for you. They'll even design your cover. They claim they'll even edit it for you. But back then, and now we're talking about in the 80s, the mid-80s, there wasn't those kind of options. The closest self-publishing option you would get would be Kinko's. And to me, that wasn't an option.
Right.
So, but what there were a lot of then, not so much now, are these small independent presses. These are folks that you can usually find by picking up a copy of Writer's Market. And I learned very, very early that you pick up a copy of Writer's Market, and that has all the contact information at your local library. That is all your contact information for every publisher. But then you have to go and find their books, because you have to know what do they actually publish. So these were regional independent presses in Seattle, throughout Washington, into Oregon. And the books that I was writing at that point were pretty traditional science fiction and fantasy. When requested, I did one mystery by kind of almost a spec writing.
But were they for the younger age
They
group?
weren't.
They weren't?
They
Okay.
weren't, which I can't explain that. You know, people say, how was a 10-year-old doing this? How was this? I can't. I don't think I'm any more mature or intelligent or whatever. That's not what I was reading. I was a very late reader. I didn't read until about the time I was 10. And I consumed what is now called, adult, not adult in a R-rated way, but adult science fiction and fantasy. The young adult work, it didn't appeal to me at all.
So then you were not started out on comic books like so many of us were.
No. Loved comics, but didn't really discover the world of comics until I was a teenager. And then it was it was like a lot of catch up. It was everything from ElfQuest to X-Men to the gorgeous graphic novels that Akira began as. Nausicaa and the Valley of the Winds, Silent Mobius. But that wasn't until my teen years, and I think I was so thrilled to find a visual medium.
Right.
And what a lot of people don't know, actually, is that in high school, I actually made 3 feature films. So folks think that our first film work began 6 years ago, but actually back then, and then we were literally shooting on giant VHS camcorders.
We get back into this whole idea of like you said, the graphics, when you first saw what we now call graphic novels, which are fantastic comic books is what they are. Did that in a way start getting you more of a mindset of looking at film because you saw that visualization?
Well, it's interesting. I've never thought of it that way until literally now, saying, oh, I found comics as a teen, and that's when I did film for the first time. I don't think that was a conscious decision. Now, as an adult, going into writing a script, we began our first series, we wrote it in traditional script format, and I hated it. I thought it was inefficient.
And we're going to get into that later.
Yeah, okay, so we'll go. But, so the scripts that we now write are in a proprietary format called modular method, and those are written storyboards, and that's very comic-like.
Yeah.
We've actually had folks that work in the comic industry on set who are as actors, and they'll say, oh, this is a comic script. We're like, oh, I've never thought of it that way. But yes, it is. It's a prose storyboard. Yeah.
So then you started writing, and then what was I'm asking for kind of like a big leap, if there was such thing. All of a sudden you were writing and you go, oh, I'm going to jump into film.
So what happened is I basically built my career the way my mom told me I was going to have to do, and I was eventually published by a large New York press, and I toured nationally.
I got to be nosy. What's the press? You're not going to tell me.
I'm not going to tell you. I mean, it's easy enough. Well, the only reason that I don't want to is I kind of feel like any publicity is good publicity. So even if I sit here and say they had a 19-year-old girl touring, and they had me signing and selling books in bars and nightclubs, and they were giving kickbacks to those establishments. I shouldn't even have legally been there. True. I was a commodity. I was treated like a commodity. I was dressed like a commodity. But I know that by naming them, I am continuing to give them publicity. So I choose not to do that.
Well, that's an I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a side of, I would say, all of the media and entertainment that you don't see. I saw
No, you don't.
because I was in law enforcement, but that's something people don't even realize exists.
It's very true. I mean, I would not trade the experience of being a 19-year-old and being flown all over the country for 2 years to do these book signings. Barnes and Nobles, literally the lines around the block type thing, because the publicity, being a Seattle Times bestseller for 3 consecutive weeks, those are huge things to me.
Oh, yeah.
But when I came off those 2 years,
Yeah.
I really literally feel like I went from being a kid to now being an adult. And what I had was a bank account full of cash. And what I didn't want was to ever do that again.
Right.
So I continued to then work with independent presses. I bought out a small independent press and started running it myself, only publishing my own work. And I mean, publishing other people, but only doing my work through this small press
Right.
where I could have control. One of the major complaints I had had is that the main character in the book that I had published with the New York press was a black woman, and they put a white woman on the cover. I mean, not a different character. They literally drew the character
And they
white.
didn't read the book.
Right. One can only, I have often wondered, okay, was this about me? Was this about the child protege that
Yeah.
they were going to market? Was it less about the book? Now, of course, the book was dystopian, which was still very new at that point. It was about rebelling against a established society and an authority. So, I mean, I think there was those tropes that were very classic. But anyway, I continued in my career and bought a house and was paying our bills. I had 2 children as a single mom, beautiful Port Orchard. Having grown up in Seattle, I really wanted something a little bit away from the city, but still I love Seattle, so Port Orchard was so perfect. I never wanted my kids to have to move. I wanted to buy a home and then have children, have them live there, grow up there, because we moved a lot when I was little. And then I met Brianne, and 6 years ago, I woke up one day, it was our anniversary, and I said, I know this pays our bills, but I don't like it anymore. I am so isolated as a novelist. It's just me. And I feel lonely. And I love you and I love our kids, and they're so quickly becoming adults.
Yeah.
They're so quickly growing up, but I just can't continue doing this anymore. And she took a leap of faith with me, and we decided to expand the company so that it wasn't just books,
Right.
but also film. And so that with film, of course, I'm writing a novel in a way, but there's all these living characters.
But you added something that I'm going to try to jump into now
Sure.
with your filmmaking, because it helped with something that I think most people don't realize, involving some of your, involving your children. And I would like to really have you go into that, because I'm trying to get people out there in the world to think outside the box.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, so if you can delve
So
into that.
we decided to grow this company and to branch into film, but what would our first film be? And so we're just kind of mulling this over. We didn't have like a bunch of scripts in a drawer.
Right.
I had never written in that form in my
Yeah.
life. And I did take a course. I took a nice screenwriting course that I liked, and just kind of being prepared
Right.
for when that idea hit me. And one day I come downstairs, and Brianne is watching TV. We're not actually a big TV family, but
Right.
Brianne was watching TV with Faith, our daughter, who at the time,
She was 9.
she was 9. And they were watching a ghost hunting show.
Right.
And Faith turned to me and said pretty casually, these ghost hunting shows, they never have girls like me.
Right.
And I said, you mean like little girls? She said, well, yeah, but girls that, have type 1 diabetes like me, or brothers who are autistic like me. And I'm like, well, that's strangely specific, but yeah, honey, that's very true. She said, well, you write. Why don't you write a show starring a girl with type 1 diabetes, with a brother who's autistic, and, make that happen. And
Okay.
and that was the flashpoint, because it's like, I said, well, I don't want to be alone. Brianne, will you support me? I don't want to be alone. I want to do something communal, and I think film is that. But there was no passion. With novels, I could explore things that mean something to me. I didn't really know, well, what really means something to me so much that I would put in all the time and working with so many people and all the organization that has to go into a film project. And that was it. That was it. When Max wasn't even 4 years old yet, when a doctor looked me in the face and said, he will never speak and he will never contribute to the world in a meaningful way. Put him in a home now, because you're a single mom and he's a boy and he's going to outgrow you, and there's going to be a point where you physically can't handle him. And I walked out of there sobbing, holding my son's hand, saying, I'm going to ignore everything he just said. And I'm one of those people who really respects doctors. So that was like a shattering world moment for me. And then Faith was born, and a lot of people don't even understand what type 1 diabetes is. I mean, I didn't. She was diagnosed at 18 months old, and she was the second youngest kiddo ever diagnosed in the state of Washington. Type 1 is rising. You know, they have tied it into being an autoimmune disorder. And I mean, still to this day, folks will say to Faith, well, can't you just exercise? And I'm like, okay, this isn't type 2, this is type 1. Her pancreas has just shut down. There's nothing she did or didn't do. This isn't about lifestyle and exercise or any of those things. So these two conditions, now Maxwell has now been reclassified as they're dividing things up as having Asperger's as opposed to autism. They've divided them.
Right.
And, but Faith and Max both live every day with these. And I understand I'm supposed to be okay with calling them disabilities. You know, with the show that we launched, Go Sniffers Inc., the whole point, our whole tagline was, all of our young actors live with the real medical condition, the real disability that their characters live with. And those conditions are discussed and covered in the show. But in the world, the alternate world of the show, those disabilities grant them super abilities. It's a trade-off. In this world, genetics gives you a trade-off automatically. So they're like the Scooby Gang.
Yeah.
They solve little mysteries together. It's cute. It's heartwarming. It's epic. There's you know, choreographed battles, and they're facing monsters and all this. But Maxwell and Faith will always live with these disabilities. Now, neither of them see them as disabilities. They just see them as part of themselves. Maxwell's photographic memory, that I understand has been tied to Asperger's, is a blessing. He can see a script the first day, and he can give me a page-long monologue after reading it once.
And that's why, one reason why I wanted to get into this was because I could tell by watching the films and everything that this is a way for, like I said, thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
And from people getting outside their box.
Yes.
Because having dealt with some people with Asperger's syndrome when I was in law enforcement, which is a completely different story, but it was the whole idea of, you look at it and you understand that there comes a time where if you work with people, they can become connected to quote-unquote normal society or not connected. But it sounds like because you were willing to push back, you were able to, like I said, tell the doctor, go take a flying leap.
I wasn't willing to let go of my son.
Right.
I think more than anything, because at that point especially, it was him and me in the world. That's it. And I just wasn't willing. I wasn't willing to walk away from him. And that was in, let's see, the very, very early 2000s. So it would have been like 2000, not even 2002 yet, like 2001.
Yeah.
And I wasn't willing to let go.
Right.
And I was, yes, you're right, I was more willing to shape the world to fit Maxwell than I was to shove Maxwell into a dark corner and forget about him. And it was hard in that, you know, he didn't speak until after Faith was born in 2002. Actually, so she was speaking before he was.
So how old was he, if I can be nosy?
He would have been five or six before he was speaking, 5.5. And I, to this day, feel he started speaking to communicate with Faith because she was speaking, and she drove him nuts.
Okay.
I think it just had to be that.
I have two sisters, so yeah.
Oh, there we go. He was in his own world in that classic way that is, I think, associated with autism, especially nonverbal autism. I cleared out, sold, or gave away all the furniture in our giant living room so that he could build these elaborate Thomas the Train tracks.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And she would scoot in there on her little butt. She would just scoot in, dragging herself along, and she would very slowly bend herself over at the waist and bite one of his trains.
Oh.
And he had to learn to say, Faith, don't do that.
Oh.
So I really think that was it. I think the only real far-reaching thing that friends of ours that our parents say is a negative is that neither of the kids have ever called me mom. I've always been Jennifer, because by the time they were both speaking, the people around me called me by my name. So literally never. There's never been a mommy, mama. It's always Jennifer.
But they still give you Mother's Day cards, right?
Oh, they give us Mother's Day posters. They write how much we mean to them. I mean, we have maybe I'm biased, but the two best kids in the world. Their conditions have made them stronger, and they've made them very aware and very sensitive to differences and diversity in all of its different forms, whether it's race or economic class or size or age. And as you know, Mark, that's at the heart of Blue Forge.
Right.
Is we cast, not blind to those things, but we cast against stereotype. So if some of the horrible stereotypes in Hollywood, like Catholic priests are all child molesters,
right?
Okay, or young black men are all drug pushers, things like this. We will cast completely opposite type. So we might still deal with a manipulative adult or a molester of some kind, but we're going to put it in a completely different, the opposite of the stereotype. Our drug dealer is going to be a upwardly mobile white woman who is a soccer mom, something like that. So we don't shy away from those characters, but we do cast against stereotype. And I think that is because of the kids' conditions.
You have to pay attention.
I will.
You're out in the world. You're not safe at home.
I know, Anne. I know.
Don't have your eyes on your phone.
I like to take pictures.
Take pictures with your eyes.
I see everything now.
I'd rather see you. Here we are.
True north.
Look both ways.
I did.
I'm waiting for you. Andy.
Give Mom a hug for me.
We'll try again tomorrow.
I'll be here.
So I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning into Bremerton Kitsap Access Television and viewing this Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers production. I also want to thank the BCAT staff on cameras and the director's chair. If it wasn't for them, we would never be able to do this. We broadcast these interviews on every Saturday at 6 p.m. either on Channel 3 on Wave Cable and Channel 12 on Comcast. Keep in touch with on our Claw Facebook. You'll be able to see when we're going to be broadcasting these shows. Before we go into part 2, I want to thank everybody for being here. I also want to wish everybody have a nice, pleasant day and a productive and fascinating year. And so until part 2, I'm Mark Miller with the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers in conjunction with Bremerton Kitsap Access Television. Good day. Well, I stumbled over that.